Today's gospel is about Christ the King. And I always have a problem with Christ the King because we fought a revolutionary war to get rid of kings. So he's a different kind of king. So keep that in mind as we go through all this. But in today's gospel, it's asking us to reflect on leadership, really. Leadership's hard to define and doesn't seem to follow any particular formula. One thing all leaders have, good leaders anyway, is vision. Um, so the sons of Zebedee, James and John, are quite arrogant and overly self confident when they ask Jesus for the prize spots of leadership in the kingdom. The indignation of all the disciples over James and John's attitude belies the fact that they all have the same attitude. They all want to be the bosses. And this gives Jesus a good opportunity to teach his disciples about Christian leadership. Um, Jesus gives them an image of servant leadership, which is noble and paradoxical. Jesus' type of leadership is absolutely contrary to the idea of his times and perhaps even our own political leadership of our times. Many leaders lord it over their subjects. Soviet communism was a prime example. Selfish leadership is far from Jesus' ideal of servant leadership. To be the slave of all appears to be quite the opposite of leadership as we usually experience it, but even more so to the people of Jesus' time. To speak of slaves was not unusual, as it was an accepted practice and a Roman custom, but to speak of the slave of all made no sense, as a slave had only one master. So someone could buy a slave from another owner, ransom them if they were kidnapped, but to put the concept of leadership and being a slave together was a paradox almost impossible for people to understand in Jesus' time. So the image of a cup of and baptism used in today's reading at St. Mark evokes the images of suffering. Christ at Gethsemane, drinking the cup which God the Father refused to remove, meaning his suffering and death. And baptism being a kind of death through drowning and rising to life with Christ. So Jesus sets James and John, he lets them know his leadership requires a willingness to suffer for others. Jesus is teaching us that the goal of his life and death was not power, but service to others. And Jesus shows in his life the ideal servant of leadership. Jewish high priests used to offer sacrifices yearly on the Day of Atonement. Jesus, who offered himself once for all as the perfect sacrifice for sins, can be called the high priest. Jesus, because of his passion, death, and resurrection and ascension into heaven, is our advocate, who understands us, who is the servant leader, who sits at the throne of grace in heaven, full of mercy, because he has suffered here on earth, just as we do. So enjoy the thought of Christ our leader, not necessarily so much Christ the King. Ask yourself, how do you define leadership? Who best exemplifies leadership for you? Why? And what kind of leader are you? What kind of leadership are you looking for? Anyway, God bless you and keep you. Amen.